Thank you very much for that. There's too much. There's been too much agreement on some things in this committee. So the last couple times, but I'm going to ask some questions just to help me understand some things going on because I'm new here, but just to put a little bit of context on it, I worked in the Capitol as a staff person. From 03 to 2011, and my last job, I guess my second to last job, was working for, at that time, the only, I think, Republican chairman of a select committee, prison construction and operations, and I staffed that committee, and actually we intervened in the three-judge panels, a Republican caucus, to try to stop the early release of inmates, and I was intimately involved with discussions on everything from, time credits, how much you get from staying in county jails to going to prison, going to state prison and things like that. So this is an issue I've been worked on for a while and have been following ever since. So, just with that, obviously some things have changed. I understand, when the 137.5% capacity was put on, that put a lot of pressure on the state to figure out, how to release people and what that would look like. And then I think you've had, in my view, a lot of negative policies come as a result of that. I think we wouldn't agree on this here, but, Prop 47, Prop 57, AB 109, I mean, the list sort of goes on, but those are a reaction of obviously that, that way better than I do. But this is an issue that's really important to me. And so I'm curious it's going to be different per site, but generally speaking, what's the current prison capacity? As a 137.5%, it's capped at per facility, though, but generally speaking, what would that be?
It's around 112. I'm pulling that up.
Yeah,
Sorry.
112,698 currently.
Okay, 112%.
That's at the 137.
Okay.
And then on June 30, when CCC, or around then, when the planned closures that are going to take effect in the budget year are accounted for, it should drop to around 105 is kind of our estimate. But
Okay, so with planned closures, we're decreasing capacity, but we're also decreasing the population
Right.
so much that it'll continue to drop
right.
to 105%.
So actually, the 15,000 number is for the budget year, which is also after CCC will officially be closed. So as well as when many of
Sure.
the yard closures, if not all, will take place. So the 15,000 already includes some reduction relative to where we are today. And then there'll be an additional reduction when Chuckawalla Valley is closed in 2024, 25. But yes, you are correct. There's sort of this decline in reduction to capacity, but on net growth in empty beds over the period because the population is declining so much, is already so low and is declining more.
Okay. Thank you. Honestly, I'm kind of confused at the aggressive nature in the reduction in prison population. Just recently, PPIC came out with their report that, obviously our crime in California is, we've decreased from, 50 years ago, but in the last several years, it's basically been stagnant since actually this ruling. It's kind of gone up and down, but basically it's essentially been the same. And so a couple questions on the release of inmates from COVID. How were those determined? Who's getting released and why? Because right now we have 15,000 empty beds, if you will, vacant beds, but we released 20 to 25,000 people during COVID. So were those prioritized?
So early in the pandemic, we did release some folks, for example, lower level folks that were within 60 days of release to clear out some, quickly clear out some space because obviously COVID spreads very well in prison environments, nursing homes, and the like. Most of the population drop, we didn't do early releases per se, but we stopped intake from the counties during COVID because we did not have the capacity and did not want to increase our population. And so what you saw was us having to reimburse the counties for the cost of holding those inmates, which we are required to do via penal code. And once the pandemic was over, what we expected initially was we thought there'd be a bunch of folks that were waiting to be sentenced and were going to come into the system that really did not materialize. And you see that in that we're below projections right now. So there wasn't a mass early release scheme. We do provide credits for, credit earning opportunities for completing rehabilitation programs, college programs, earning diplomas, those type of things, though. That is correct.
Okay. Do we happen to, does LAO know what the capacity of, generally, again, it's going to be different everywhere, but of county jails?
Around 80,000 is the rated
total
rated
population?
capacity, roughly around, or not the population, the capacity.
Okay.
Yeah, and the population
80,000%. I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
80,000
rated beds by
Okay.
BSCC, if I'm not mistaken, roughly around there. And then the current population, as most recently reported by BSCC, is around 60,000.
And what's, just to help the new guy over here, obviously I've talked with county sheriffs and things like that, and and issues booking people. Can you confirm for me that whether or not people receive, and this just goes off the question that you weren't intaking people from the county jails, do inmates receive more time when they're in the county jail versus going to state prison? 3 days served for one instead of 2?
Off the top of my head, it may be different based on case factors, but individuals do get pre-sentence credits for the time that they're in county jail, but I'd have to get back to you on that answer unless anyone knows it for sure.
All right. And then what's okay, the LAO. Here we go. Question for you. And this, I think this is going to be my last question unless it sparks more. So what exactly is happening, or actually this is going to be a CDCR question. What exactly is happening over the next couple years that we see a decline in prison population?
Well, I think it's a function of some of the propositions that you mentioned before. Obviously, we do not get the level of intake into CDCR that we once did, because I think your point being that some folks now serve their time at the county jail versus the state prison level. We're also seeing fewer folks coming in to the system. I think you have our Office of Research here later today that actually does our formal projections, who can probably much better answer this than me or articulate it than me. But we're seeing, fewer projected coming into the system long term.
Okay. Yeah, it's it's interesting because you would think that most of the releases or, adjustments, the realignment from the various laws have occurred already. So that's why, maybe I'm incorrect at saying that, but that's why I'm kind of thinking, we still see a decline in population, but I would think the AB 109, 47, and 57 have, I see you guys giving me the hook here, so yes.
Carry on, but happy to
Yes,
offer some
please.
background here. So you're correct that the early releases and the temporary, sort of the COVID responses, releasing people generally 6 months or so before they would have otherwise been released, as well as having people stay in county jail longer or potentially serving their entire term and being released from county jail if they had a relatively short prison term and weren't ultimately intaken into CDCR after the halt on intake was lifted. Essentially, those factors have kind of run their course. And it's possible that there's some like maybe backlogs in court cases or maybe sort of crime decline during the pandemic that caused this temporary decline. Because there was decline in crime early on in the pandemic and certain types of crime. So there could be some things around the margin where we're still seeing effects from the pandemic on the prison population, but by and large, it appears that, as far as we understand, those have kind of worked through the system and are back to steady state. What's really driving the decline right now, that was already always going to occur, as far as we can tell, essentially was Proposition 57 and specifically the credit earning component. And that gave CDCR the authority to adjust or to set credits through regulations. So there's been various different adjustments to those regulations, but the credit package that was introduced or first announced in spring 2020, so kind of right around the same time that the COVID responses were starting to pick up, was projecting a very significant decline in the population. And CDCR Office of Research does attempt to account for policy changes in their projections, but there's been also a lot of other sentencing changes in recent years that, it's difficult to account for all of those little, not little, but they all add up essentially. And so what we're left with is, we're going to probably end up at this place where we are, regardless of COVID, but COVID perhaps got us there faster, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm concerned. You cued me right up. So thank you for that. I'm concerned that in addition to, my colleagues not really knowing of a clear plan to get to, closures, which I'm not sure I fully support anyways, although not really knowing what we're doing, I'm concerned about that. But I'm also concerned about, may have heard, lack of understanding I think we have on how the reduction is working. Maybe that'll be a time for me to hang out a little longer here today. But I think we got to have much more clarity on who's being released, why is being released. I'm familiar with the regulations, the new ones. But I don't fully understand how that's happening. And I think it's really important because we have to go back to constituents and say, hey, look, inmates are being released because of these policies. And by the way, a lot of them are set up by regulation through statutory authority, allegedly. So I think we need some more clarity on how releases are occurring and why. But I'm going to end it on a good note with in agreement with my colleague over here that Mr. Jones Sawyer, that we definitely don't want the legislature deciding